Good morning, everyone. Excited to have you with us. My name is Joel Beal. I'm the CEO of Alloy, and I'm very excited to have all of you join me today as I have a chat with my good friend, CJ Prober, who is the CEO of Tile. Today's conversation is going to be casual. We know each other well, so I think we can have a good time talking about some of the exciting things that are going on at Tile. And in supply chain in general. It's obviously been a very interesting last couple of years, and I know CJ has a lot of good insights into what's happening and what he's seeing across the supply chain, across demand, and we'll talk about what we see coming up in the next couple of years. We also have some questions that have been submitted, so we appreciate those, and the thoughts in advance that we're excited to touch on. We're not going to be going through a lot of slides. We want to keep this casual. We want to keep this conversation, but also it's always good to set the stage and give you a little bit of an overview about Tile as a business, as well as I'll share a little bit about Alloy and how we work with a company like Tile and many of our other customers. But first and foremost, I want to start and have CJ can introduce himself. Give a bit of background on his very exciting career and the many different things he's done. I think he brings a unique perspective to the world of consumer electronics, which I'm excited for him to share. And then I will share a bit about Alloy, and we'll jump into kind of a chat about where we see the state of the world today. So with that, CJ, if you want to give a little bit of background and context for those who don't know about Tile and yourself, we'll get started.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. And it's awesome to be doing this with you. I guess the first thing worth pointing out is my background really before getting involved in consumer electronics was in consumer software, digital experiences. So I spent a big chunk of my career in video games. And as part of that journey, I was at a company, we were acquired by Electronic Arts, and it was a time when Electronic Arts was primarily focused on console gaming. And over the 6 years that I was there as part of the leadership team, we really transitioned that business from selling video games at retail, as a DVD, to digital experience, whether it was mobile games, social games, or bringing digital experiences to even console platforms. So I'm very used to operating in a very data-rich environment, looking at LTV to CAC, and but my last couple of experiences, I've combined that with consumer electronics focus. So I joined GoPro before GoPro went public, and GoPro had a similar business model as EA. It was selling cameras at retail. And so the opportunity there was really to transition GoPro to a direct-to-consumer business, build a mobile app experience around the camera to help you offload your content, and then monetize GoPro in a different way. So transition to kind of a subscription or membership model. And if you look at GoPro today, that's kind of the foundation of the business. It's direct to consumer, it's selling a membership, and they've seen a lot of success there. Tile, in a lot of ways, was very similar. So I joined Tile about 4 years ago as a board member, then I stepped in as CEO. And Tile was largely selling, had an amazing app, but was selling devices at retail. And we saw an opportunity to transition the business model to really offer Tile consumers the opportunity to purchase Tile through a membership or a service. And it's one of those situations where it's kind of better for consumers, better for Tile because of the business model shift. And then on top of that, we layered in kind of a third-party ecosystem element where third-party device OEMs could embed Tile, just software, embed the Tile software to make their devices findable with Tile. So brands like Skullcandy and HP have been, we have many partners, but those have been kind of two of our signature partners in the earbud and head and PC space. And so before getting thrown into kind of the consumer electronics supply chain world, when I became chief operating officer at GoPro, again, my focus was really on software and monetizing experiences via memberships and microtransactions. So it was quite a eye-opening experience getting involved in kind of very different elements of managing consumer electronic businesses, which obviously GoPro and Tile have a big part of their business even today, just selling devices.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You're right. That's a new world that you got exposed to then here in the last couple of roles in your career. And how did you learn about that? Was it just kind of baptism by fire here, or?
It was. I mean, I had the benefit of being having a great team at GoPro and Tile who really have spent their whole career in consumer electronics, and I viewed my job as really bringing kind of a very data-driven mindset to managing those businesses, which is much more challenging because you're not offering kind of a digital service. You're selling devices at retail. Access to data is more challenging, as you know really well. But my belief is that in the future, there shouldn't really be any difference. You should have access to all the data, whether it's point of sale data, pricing data, and you should be able to iterate and dynamically operate a consumer electronics business just like you do a digital service. So I've really been driving our teams in that direction, and then all in furtherance of really transitioning our business model to kind of membership and selling a subscription. And it's probably worth noting, Tile was recently acquired by Life360, which is a purely kind of app-based membership model. And I can talk a little bit more about how we fit into that.
Yeah, fascinating. So really, I think, and I'm sure many of those that are going to be listening to this will be interested, but seeing that, you really having a career where I think on the leading edge of as the digital and the physical worlds really come together, which I think is exciting, and something that, video games being probably one of the leading areas where that happened. And I certainly remember, well, it wasn't that many years ago, right? We had to go buy the cartridges or the CD-ROMs or DVDs or whatever it is. And now, you get things instantly delivered. But something that's happening, I know, across, a lot of different businesses where they're saying, okay, how do I bring those things together? So I think we're going to be able to have a good conversation about that. Excited for the questions ahead. Let me give a little bit of a background for those who don't know anything about Alloy and myself, and then we'll jump in and we'll start talking about some of the things that are top of mind, I think, for both of us. So Alloy is a connected planning and execution platform specifically built for consumer brands. So that could be a brand like Tile. We work extensively in consumer electronics. We work a lot in CPG, food and beverage, DIY, toys and games, you name it. We work across all sorts of different, verticals, but specifically with companies that are selling to consumers in lots of different ways, right? That's through, traditional retail channels, direct to consumer. And the core idea behind Alloy is really some of the things CJ was talking about. We see this collision of, there's a physical world out there, right? We all have things that we purchase and we use, but we obviously have, a digital world as well that's, around how we track all those things, how we ensure that we're able to understand where products are and making sure we're producing the right amounts and we're putting them in the right place for people who want to buy them. And Alloy is really designed to help at its most basic level. I'm an economist by background and by training. It's helping to align supply and demand for companies in as real time as we possibly can. So what we do is we bring together demand planning, inventory planning, sales, marketing, finance, and operations onto a single platform so that people can see, where your goods are, what demand patterns look like, price points, how much you're manufacturing, and ensuring that all of those things are connected and being optimized. And so you're running the best possible business that you can. And, the core idea is really around, identifying where issues are today or where issues are likely to exist, right? Because we can start to project where things are going to be in the coming weeks and months ahead. What you can do to solve those issues, and giving you the information and the insight so that you can diagnose and resolve those things in advance. So we work with a lot of great brands, as I mentioned, and just excited to talk about, obviously, generally what's going on in supply chain today. It's been, I guess one could use the term exciting last couple of years. When I founded Alloy, 5-6 years ago, supply chain just wasn't as talked about as it is today. It's amazing. Every day I feel like I turn on my phone and I look in the news, and there's some new issue that's top of mind, which is exciting, but also reflects a world that where there's a lot of issues that brands like Tile, I know, are working through. So without further ado, I'm going to get rid of these slides and CJ and I can chat a bit. So CJ, to start off with, I'm going to ask a question that I know is a little bit trite, probably overused, but I think can set the stage for this conversation and help people kind of get into the mind a little more of a CEO today, right? And as I was just talking about, I think you can appreciate, I know we've talked about, it's been an interesting couple of years for many different reasons. We won't jump into all of them. But as you wake up this morning, right? You've had a weekend, you're ready to start the week. What are the things that are top of mind for you? What are the things that both give you a bit of trepidation for the future and concern, and what are those things that get you really excited?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the timing of this webinar is pretty perfect in a lot of ways, because we are in a pretty unprecedented time when you think about our ability to predict demand with everything that's happening at a macro level with consumer confidence, inflation, channel shifts, et cetera. And then you combine that with supply chain disruptions. When you operate a business that produces products that you sell to retailers who sell through to consumers, you're investing capital, to build that product. And when you have that level of unpredictability at the demand side and on the supply side, it just becomes a daily war room battle. So we're spending our days, worrying about supply, trying to figure out demand. And, Tile, I didn't mention it, Tile's a global business. We have, sales across EMEA and Asia and North America. And so, and every geography is not created equally in terms of, what's happening. So I would say that's the main thing that's keeping us up at night, kind of managing that chess game. The things I'm excited about is we just completed our acquisition by Life360, and Tile has about 500,000 members. Life360 has over 1 million. Life360 focuses on people. We focus on things. There's this incredible opportunity to bring our products together and our services together to offer, the must-have family service for people, pets, and things, where we deliver peace of mind. And that was our vision at Tile, just to offer a membership, which would include our devices, and the opportunity to accelerate that with Life360 is pretty awesome. So we're in the early days of the integration, but you can see where that's going to go, and the team's super fired up about that. But when you think about, in some ways, the supply and demand challenges are exacerbated for us, because not only are we is our P&L reliant on selling devices, but our top of the funnel in terms of bringing people into our membership relies on selling our devices, and then third-party devices, like I mentioned, the devices that are embedded with Tile. So a lot of time focused on the former issue, but we're super excited about the opportunity ahead.
Yeah. And did you see this unpredictability really increase around the time of COVID? Was it already a trend that was, I mean, obviously there's always been unpredictability, but I'm curious if there's certain points where you've seen that really increase or decrease for that matter.
Yeah, there's really been kind of, I would say three, I'm going to generalize, but three main phases, and it's all tied with COVID.
Yeah.
So phase one was extended lead times due to supply constraints, shipping challenges, et cetera. And, we were effectively, we went into COVID, we saw a significant impact to demand because a lot of people were going to stores. Amazon was only shipping essential goods. So that was a fairly short window. We recovered out of that quickly. And then it became, how are we going to make enough products to fulfill this demand? And if you look at just kind of macro demand cycles, we had a dip at COVID and then a real increase in 2021. And then there's kind of a readjustment that's happening now. So kind of phase one was the extended lead times, the shipping. Phase two was like stuff started getting more expensive, which is a natural kind of knock-on effect from phase one. And now we're in this phase three where there was kind of some obvious, oh yeah, people are moving online. People aren't going to stores because of COVID. But now the level of unpredictability is quite significant, and inflation and all of the macro factors that layered on top of that are creating very different kind of challenges and trends in different markets. And so we're constantly having to adjust to the inputs and the output demand signals to manage the business.
Right. And I think we're going to touch on this a little more later, but you get to do all that with much longer lead times than you used to have, which, makes this problem that much more difficult.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
It's funny, like the people have historically, before anything relating to COVID, these supply and, demand challenges, predictability challenges, people would say consumer hardware is hard. And if you're like, well, why is that? And it's really like, you have to, especially if you're not a consumable product, you have to fill the revenue bucket from scratch every year. And so if you're non-consumable, you're either upgrading existing customers or expanding your reach to new customers. Upgrading obviously requires constant innovation and improvement. But you need to predict that level of demand every year, and you're making a big investment in inventory, and then you need to sell it through. And so this whole consumer hardware is hard because you're refilling the bucket every year. You're making this bet that you're going to be able to predict how much consumer demand you're going to have for your product, both from an upgrade and a new consumer perspective. And so when you basically take the two ends of that equation, the supply unpredictability, the demand unpredictability, globally, and different trends impacting different regions, like consumer hardware has always been hard, but it's just gotten like incredibly challenging given those two confluences of events.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, as you mentioned, that's a long-term saying that people have had. I've never worked in consumer hardware myself. I've always been on the software side. But it's definitely always known as being a challenging space, but obviously one that can work really well if you can get it right. But sounds like not, a lot of problems you're always continuously working against. Every product cycle or every year, you've got to decide how much, as you said, you're going to produce. You get it wrong, you're stuck with a lot of product that, goes obsolete, I imagine. So unique challenges that aren't necessarily the same, even for a lot of other consumer products where, they might have, freshness issues and things like that, but generally less capital intensive, probably in terms of, certainly the amount that each of those products costs. When you look at the current environment, I know we've already talked about this. So you've mentioned, lead times getting a lot longer. Are there other things that you're seeing in today's environment that are making that hard problem even more difficult?
Yes. I would say what we're seeing is a change in lead times, but then even when you meet lead times, availability of key components are at risk, right?
Okay.
Because there's so many layers to the supply challenge, and we purchase components that themselves have, inputs required,
Right.
and those inputs are at risk. And then a lot of times they'll use an outsourced manufacturer to fabricate or test, their components, and just across the board, there's bottlenecks. And so we're seeing, extremely long lead times for key components, over a year, in a lot of cases. And then what we've experienced recently, because we're coming on about a year's time since that's happened, we're actually seeing component suppliers decommit, even though that we've been met with lead times. So that's really been challenging. Then, once you manufacture your product, there's obviously been a lot published around just like getting product from point A to point B and the cost of that. And if you look at the cost of, shipping from China as an example, it's just been a massive increase, right, in costs and a lot of unpredictability. So when, the Shenzhen region shuts down because of COVID, a lot of companies manufacture their products in Shenzhen. That's incredibly disruptive. So there's kind of like these systemic issues that I don't see going away anytime soon. And then there's these like pleasant little surprises that get thrown in on top of those from time to time.
That sounds delightful.
Yeah.
I'm sure you sleep well, with all those on your mind. Yeah, you've got this obviously a complicated supply chain, as you said, with multiple kind of layers of this, and any part gets backlogged, and you end up dealing with it. So using that example that you gave of a component supplier who's committed and then decommits, what are your options at that point? Are you just scrambling to find another supplier? Do you have to go try to re-engineer a product? What does one do in that scenario?
Yeah, well, one thing that we've been proactive about is, it's always good to multi-source key components.
Right.
And we have accelerated our efforts to do that. And that's really paid dividends, because not all component manufacturers are subject to the same inputs and limitations. So, one supplier may be reliant on a specific fabricator, another may not. And, that leads to significant variability in lead times and flexibility. So our hands have been forced more so than ever to actually multi-source key components. Now that's not a kind of, we'll just like, in a lot of cases, we'll just pull this in, get this all sorted in a couple of weeks. That's a multi-month process, to design in, to test, and very expensive, to test new components within your products. But that's an example of something that we started well over a year ago and is paying significant dividends now.
Okay. And what, I mean, that's a great example of one thing around, component shortages or maybe cost changing where you want to try to substitute something else. What are other things that you're doing to kind of mitigate, I guess, the current issues that you're seeing or potential future issues that you see down the line?
Yeah. So if you think about, first of all, there's no kind of silver bullet.
That's too bad. I'm sure everybody was waiting
Yeah,
for that.
yeah.
Nugget from
Sorry, if anybody was expecting an easy solution to this problem, it's not. I don't have it. I don't think it exists. But there's some longer term things that I think are important to think about. And again, Tile was early to this was part of our vision as I got involved, was shifting business models, right? Because when you have a more predictable source of demand, it allows you to plan around the longer term horizons, like in an easier way than if you're just filling the bucket every year. So that is a strategy that, again, that's not an overnight, that's a very long-term strategy. But if you look at companies, like there's a lot happening in this area right now. There's companies like Whoop that sell the fitness band. That's pure membership model. Xbox just launched a new membership, $25 a month. You get the console, you get access to a bunch of games, you get Xbox Gold. There's Apple's rumored to be doing this. So those business model changes, I think, really play, really allow you to build a more predictable business, even if it has a device component. But that's much longer term. I think in the shorter term, one of the things that's worked really well for us is just building a repeatable process around much longer term planning. So, for example, we're now planning our roadmaps for new products almost a year ahead of where we would have otherwise in kind of a non-supply constrained environment, because you've got to order those key components with a year's lead time. So by definition, you have to have your roadmap earlier. We're looking at just the broader supply requirements on a much longer time frame. So we have like rolling 2-year supply models that we're constantly updating and iterating on. And one of the things that we've found valuable in doing that is the more simplicity you can bring to your roadmap. Now, you obviously need to innovate and serve your customers with the right products, but simplicity in SKU mix is one of those things that really pays massive dividends in a situation like this, because you're solving for less variables. And so that's I think a strategy that pays dividends in normal times as well, but now specifically. So that's really on the supply side. On the demand side, it's a whole different, it's a whole different ball of wax. And really, this is where my predisposition to looking at data kind of informs our strategy. So we, of course, do all the regular things of looking at macro trends and segment trends and market share. But we also go very deep on asking the whys. And so to give you an example, we use Alloy for this, but really drilling down, if you have a retailer that's underperforming expectations, why is that? And you can look at the data, and it can be, it can be associated with their foot traffic. But a lot of times when you peel back the onion and you look at sales by store, you can identify things in different regions, or you can identify inventory shortages. And a lot of times retailers aren't great at, they've got so many products, they're not great at identifying those issues for you. So you really have to take that burden from them and do your own work to identify, hey, like we have 50% of our retailer X stores are not selling any product, and it's because like the inventory is stuck at a distribution center, and we need to get that retailer X to unlock that, get that into stores and deployed. And what our experience is that retailers react really well to us sharing that level of data. And oftentimes, we leverage Alloy for this, and we bring this data and these insights to them, and they're like, oh, wow, like we had no idea, let us dig in, because incentives are aligned, right, around driving sales. So that constant pullback, peeling the onion on demand and asking the whys is really critical. And then what's been most, I think, impactful for us is like marrying those two things together. So because there's so much uncertainty on the supply side, so many shifting demand signals, and again, look at this globally, it's, the complexity is amplified. What you need to do is you need to be in a constant state of replanning, constantly. And taking the latest demand signals, taking the latest supply signals, and iterating, on a weekly basis. And that's where having, a platform that allows you to easily kind of marry those two data points and turn and iterate on your plan without relying on, some laborious Excel process is really valuable. And it's not, it's not perfect, but it's really allowed us to stay on top of changes and make decisions that have, long-term impacts to our benefits earlier than we might otherwise be able to.
Yeah. If only we could just add the ability to help you instantly manufacture products,
Yes, we'd be done. If we could make our devices as easy as like changing pixels in a mobile app, we'd be in good shape. But
that's right. I guess there are some challenges of dealing with physical products that probably aren't going away anytime soon. Actually, on that question, do you see these, I'll call them these trends or these changes that have happened in the last couple of years, much longer lead times? That sounds like from a product roadmap standpoint, you're really, planning out what you're going to do, with a longer term horizon in mind than you have historically. Do you see those things subsiding over time, or do you think those are going to be kind of trends that stay with us for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, great question. So maybe just breaking it down a little bit. I think if you think about the supply side of things and you think about consumer demand kind of adjusting with, the changing macro environment and with inflation and consumer confidence and all of that, you would think at some point that needs to normalize. We're seeing no signs of that. It's only getting worse. And so we are planning as if this is our new reality, for the foreseeable future. And I think that's largely going to be the case on the supply side.
Okay.
What's impossible to predict is, what surprises COVID's going to bring, because, we're seeing, even today, I heard that, parts of the country are reintroducing mask mandates. You've got some of the stuff that's happening in China with the lockdowns. And so those things are incredibly disruptive. So there's no end in sight for that. And so we are operating on the assumption that that's not going to change. And just one of the things that we do in our planning that I think is good in normal times, but also in times like this, is we take a supply constrained approach, right? So we would much rather have less supply than is needed to meet demand than all sorts of excess supply. And right. So, we assume things aren't going to change. We take a supply constrained approach, and that's how we plan. On the demand side, we are starting to see things revert back. So pre-COVID, you have, a certain level of channel split between brick and mortar and online. That was massively skewed to online. Some of that's never, they've kind of accelerated the shift.
Right.
But we are seeing, somewhat of a reversal now of more people going into stores. And again, it varies by country. And so some of that is normalizing a little bit. But again, I think those shifts, again, some are irreversible, but I think those shifts are really dependent on what happens with, future waves of COVID. So it's very unpredictable. And so I think we've got at least another couple of years of, the situation that we're in now.
Yeah. And you kind of alluded to this earlier, but do as you're looking at some of those regional trends, as a global business, and obviously different parts of the world have been impacted in different ways, or at least at different times. Can you see patterns of things that are happening in one region and say, oh, I see this happening here, and it's likely to start, I'm going to start seeing that in other parts or regions of my business? Is
Yeah,
that something that you do? Okay.
yeah, for sure. So some countries in Asia, for example, have been slower to recover from COVID. Like if you take Japan or Australia, um, and so we've looked at trends in the United States as kind of the vaccine has been rolled out and things have been returning somewhat back to normal, and you can kind of see those things playing out on a different time scale in other markets. Not exactly, because the other thing to note is like the each region has a different mix of online versus brick and mortar, and that impacts the timing and the level of recovery. But you can take kind of macro trends and apply those to different markets as they recover on a different timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very interesting. Probably trying to tease out where one can use the data to extrapolate. I mean, there's always the challenge with any kind of analysis, and where you say, okay, this is some kind of causal effect, and I'm going to see it happen over here, and where things can be more idiosyncratic based on local trends or something that's just going to be more localized. Everyone's obviously dealing with different issues, maybe specifically than tile, but everyone on this call, I'm sure, is going to have their unique challenges over the last couple of years. And I liked one of the comments you made that I think's always good to remember, of these types of periods just accelerate a lot of existing trends. Oftentimes these are the catalysts that make things that are happening. Certainly the shift to e-commerce being a notable example, probably just accelerates that 5 or 10 years faster than it otherwise would have happened. But as everyone goes through their own unique challenges, do you have any advice for those who are listening about what they should do to navigate this, at least period where I think most of us can agree there's increased uncertainty, increased volatility, both on, as you said, the demand side and the supply side?
Yeah, the main point of advice I would have is to take this as an opportunity to really change how you operate and kind of look at demand, look at supply, manage the two, marry those together, right? Because don't let any crisis go unwasted.
Yeah.
And who knows when we return back to normal, but regardless, like if you take the opportunity now to approach your consumer products business in a manner that's super data driven, where you're connecting supply signals, demand signals, and iterating on a constant basis, that will pay dividends long term. So it's very much needed now. But I know there's a lot of consumer product companies that still plan based on sell-in revenue. So how much that manufacturer or OEM sells into a specific retailer, as opposed to true demand signals, which how much is getting sold through across the board. And I think those companies like that are probably having an incredibly difficult time managing through this, because you're not getting the real signals of what's happening with your business. And so, yeah, there's no better time than now to kind of make that investment. And I think we're also in a unique time where that data's never been more available than it is today. And again, it's not perfect, and it's only going to get better, but set yourself up for long-term success, and help yourself navigate through this, these short-term or 1, 2, 3 year challenges.
Yeah. It's interesting as I think of running Alloy, and I imagine you felt the same way 2 years ago when COVID started. I mean, I think there was just this assumption that, oh gosh, demand's going to dry up, businesses are going to go through this, a real famine. It's going to be really rough going, and actually most businesses ended up doing better. There
Yeah.
was, more demand. Obviously that's led to other issues and supply constraints and all the extra things that are going on there, but you just never know. It can seem like the future is very bleak and it's hard to invest and make these changes, and you just want to hunker down. And the opposite was true. It was like the companies that started making those changes early, adapted, really there was more demand than ever to meet. So I think always hard to read the tea leaves and figure out where the future is going to be, but never hurts to start that adapting, make yourself better, and then if the opportunity presents itself, there's more opportunity sometimes out there than you ever expected.
Oh, absolutely. Like we've left a lot of revenue on the table the last couple of years, and like I said, philosophically, we operate the business on a supply constrained basis. Right. But you want to narrow the gap between how much product you have to sell versus your demand. And I think that this approach of being really on top of the data, constantly iterating, allows you to squeeze that down.
Right. Can still operate in a pretty fiscally responsible, maybe more conservative approach, but make sure that you're not missing, the big opportunities out there because you're waiting a couple months to adjust. Yeah, I like that.
Exactly.
CJ, this has been awesome. I've got a couple questions that were submitted, if you've got a moment for me to ask these. So one that came in was, what is the number one advantage experience utilizing Alloy's software program?
So when I think about, again, back to my video game days, operating live services where you're getting immediate feedback on how consumers are reacting to a new feature, immediate feedback on the performance of your marketing. I think I view Alloy as kind of the foundation of enabling that for a consumer products business. So you're able to connect the demand signals at the lowest level, so point of sale data at retailers, all the way through to kind of the supply side, and Alloy enables you to, like, one of the things that I think is most challenging and that doesn't really exist today is taking that data and building a demand planning process on top of that allows you to iterate quickly. My experience has been that, with Excel, most people use Excel. With Excel, it's like, okay, we've got some new demand signals in. We're going to spend the next 2 weeks like running through that, running those signals through our through our Excel sheet, and we'll come back to you on like what it means. And it's just like, whoa, that is like 2 weeks too long.
Right.
And so the ability to do scenario planning, to connect the dots with a single platform, I think that is the number one advantage of working with Alloy.
Yeah, my guess is if you go back to even years ago, your days at EA, nobody was sitting there thinking about these games on like multi-week or multi-month adjustment schedules, right?
Yeah. At the time, at the time we complained a lot about the data. It's like, oh man, our data sucks. But we made the investments just like, we're making on the device side now, to, build the pipeline, get the triggers in, connect the dots, have a single source of truth to the organization. Because that's the other thing, like as you scale, people are looking at different points of data. Nobody really knows what's happening. So the single point of truth is another major benefit. But yeah, it's hard work. Like this doesn't like, you don't snap your fingers and this happens. You've got to get the right platform in and then connect the data sources. But once you unlock that, it's like the benefits are massive.
Yeah. And I think you've mentioned this a couple times, but not letting, perfect be the enemy of good, and, realizing that, again, even in, digital gaming, where probably the data is better, faster to come by than it often is in supply chain, there's always issues. It doesn't matter what business you're running in. People are going to debate the data, but using that as a reason to say, well, the data is not perfect, we don't have perfect measurements is not going to help, today. You got to take what you can get, make the most out of that, and iterate and get better.
Exactly.
A second question, a little bit more specific here, very interested in drilling down to store level to find insights and then how to execute against those insights.
This is my favorite. I don't think this is the number one advantage of Alloy, but this is my favorite use case of Alloy because, it allows you to unlock the answers to like several levels of whys. And I talked about an example of this earlier, but when a certain retail is struggling, like you have to know, is that a store level issue? Is that an inventory issue? Is that a retailer foot traffic issue? Is it a placement issue? And so being able to unlock, at a store level, look at those on a percentile basis, marry up sell through with inventory, like it's just massively insightful. And we've never done this in a way where we've been, there's always opportunities to improve the deployment of inventory, the matching inventory with demand. Again, retailers are managing thousands of products and they're not doing this analysis. They've got the data, they're not doing this analysis. Like you have to do it. It's your responsibility and bring those insights to the retailer, and they're fully aligned on solving it. So that's, that's very specifically what we do quite frequently is when we see issues and even do it just on a regular basis, look at kind of retailers' performance by stores to really understand like what, if there's some weirdness happening there, what is it?
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, we've obviously talked about very macro issues here, things that are happening, freight costs, moving things from China to the US all the way down to, sometimes you need to go down and say, hey, there's an issue at these particular stores, that needs to be rectified. Somebody didn't set up a product display correctly, or, they're not getting inventory from the back room, onto the shelves. And it's one of the things that makes supply chain really hard. There's a lot of different parts of this. There's obviously a lot of different types of expertise that need to be brought together. But obviously so much opportunity, to improve across all that. And I know you're on that journey as, we're obviously trying to help a lot of different companies in that regard, but appreciate that. Well, CJ, really appreciate the time. As always, you're incredibly thoughtful and insightful. I've had the pleasure of knowing CJ now for a number of years, and always someone who I think just as, brings a lot of good insight into things, is, very open about it. And I appreciate you sharing some of the things that you've seen. Obviously, I've had an exciting career. Congrats on the recent acquisition and the success that you and the Tile team have had, and really appreciate just the opportunity to work with you. So I want to thank you for joining me today, spending some time to answer some questions. I hope that's been useful for those of you who are listening, and thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joel.